Good morning one and all, and welcome to another frosty morning walk in February, and we're going to Farcet today. I think we're going to Farcet today, that was the plan. I parked up near Stanground Academy and started walking along the Peterborough Road, and I thought, I'm not having this. Cars, buses, lorries. So I had a cunning plan, which was to walk down towards Cardia and Morrison's, cross the road and head in on the banks of the Old River Nene, which is infinitely more pleasant than Peterborough Road, I have to say. No disrespect to those that live on Peterborough Road, but this is the best way to start a walk for sure. My only gamble is I actually get off this pathway when I reach Farcet, but I'm sure I will, because I know the Old Nene flirts with the edge of Farcet, so that's the plan. So yeah, we're going to do Farcet today. An old agricultural community of 100, 200, 300 people going into the early 1800s. By the time we reached the early 1900s, it was about 1,200 strong and full of brickworkers because of the brick pits nearby. History-wise, I did have a stroll through the village a couple of weeks ago, and the impression I got was that many of the old historical buildings, rather than being sort of updated and still recognisable, have actually been completely levelled and replaced with new builds. So that was disappointing, but there's still quite a bit of history in there worth seeing, and I'm going to try and tour around and pick up what I recognise and try to explain what some of those buildings are. I was looking at an old map last night and trying to follow where the Old River Nene went. I mean, this is the old course of the Nene, not the sort of north bank through to Doggin Doublet, dead straight, featureless version of the Nene. This is infinitely cuter, and this was the River Nene before that long straight section was built. It heads down through the edges of Farcet, down to Yaxley, then it swings left, or east if you prefer, across towards, I don't know if I can get the order of these places right, but it heads over towards Ramsey, March, Upwell. I don't know if that's the right order. And then it sort of dives across and jumps into the Great Ouse and then goes up towards King's Lynn, where it probably finds its way more or less back to where the current River Nene goes. And yeah, when it reaches just past Yaxley and swings inland, it kind of vanishes. Doesn't appear on maps. There's lots of little diminutive drains that it obviously travels across, but they're not named as the old course of the Nene. But when they get out the other side towards Ramsey, suddenly bang on the map, old course of the Nene. You kind of think, well, how does this bit that we're looking at and that bit join up? Then I realised the old course of the Nene used to head into Whittlesea Mere, which has long since gone. Mid-1800s, it was drained. It used to flow into one side of the Whittlesea Mere and out the other side. So when they drained it, it kind of left it with nowhere to go. But it makes its way across there. And as I say, it then heads back up via its own route to King's Lynn. I'm told it's navigable. I think it's obviously navigable here. I think it gets a bit narrow in places after Yaxley, but I'm told you can navigate. And yeah, I'm sure that'd be quite an enjoyable summer's trip. I've never seen a boat on it down here, I've got to say. But I've read several times it is navigable. Right in the distance there is Farcet. So I'm reasonably confident we should be able to escape and into the village. Right, branched off now away from the river towards houses, because I figure, well, it's certainly Farcet, so that'll do. This path keeps twisting one way then the other, and doesn't seem to have an exit point, but it's got to come out somewhere. Hallelujah, we've escaped. The road on the left here is George Alcock Way, and we will be talking about George further on in the walk, so I won't stop and talk now, but we will do him justice later on. He's probably Farcet's most famous inhabitant, or was, and he's got a road named after him. Why not? You have to excuse me shooting into the sun a wee bit today. It's a pretty low sun this time of the year. Over the road there is the village club, built in 1983 as a working men's club and became the village club in 2005. The RAOB club, that stands for, are you ready? Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes. And they're the leaseholders. Something like Freemasons, I'm told. But I don't really know. Right next to us here is the old primitive Methodist Chapel, 1907, as it says on the wall, closed in 1960. Used to be known as the Bottom Chapel because there's several chapels, or were several chapels in Farcet. Nice old photograph. There'll be plenty of photographs popping up today from about 100 years ago. I've got a nice one that goes more or less here. The cream building there in the centre of the picture on the right, sideways onto the road, used to be a blacksmith's, and there's one or two of those in Farcet as well. I think it was some sort of age-wise about 1840s through to the 1940s, so it lasted for about 100 years. It's a hairdresser's or a hair salon now, I believe. The old forge. Right, we're heading into the pub quarter. This one on the corner with the thatch was the old Anchor, the Anchor Inn. Closed in 1961, and it was certainly open in 1816, although I think it was a brew house then. And it became sort of brewery owned in about 1878, so a proper pub from about 1878 onwards. Right, this road, I think it's called Main Street today. It's the main road through Farcet. Well, it is behind me anyway, but this is still Main Street. It used to be called Bridge Street, which makes a lot more sense. That in the distance is the Black Swan pub, which we'll come on to in a mo. On this side of the pub used to be a toll house. Like all the buildings down here, it's long since been levelled. But yeah, there was a toll collector there, and he'd collect the tolls off the bridge. So on this side of the bridge, there was a gate which he used to look after and collect tolls before letting people pass. The Black Swan closed 2017. It was definitely going as the Black Swan in 1776 because I found an old newspaper report last night referring to the Black Swan. It may have existed slightly before that. There is one reference to it being called the Holt pub prior to 1776, but I can't verify that. But it certainly was the Black Swan for a long time. I don't think it's coming back, even if the sign is still there. Continuation of the old course of the Nene. As you can see, it's starting to become a bit more diminutive down here compared with where we were walking from Cardia, and you might struggle to navigate down here. I think you have to get out and carry your boat. Pub and those buildings in the distance there, it's all sort of it's a building site now. There used to be a row of thatched cottages down here. One of them always had a particular interest for me, and it was lived in by the French family. One of their sons, John French, was a GB Olympic speed skater, another of Farcet's famous sons, as it were. I'm also interested in the other brother of John, which was Paul, because he was the manager at the ice rink at Bretton when it first opened in the very early 1980s. So if you were around, as I was in the early 80s at the rink, in the very early days of ice hockey and skating, you'll know the name Paul French. And he and his family did live more or less in the middle of this picture in an old thatched cottage many, many years ago. As you can see, coming soon, going to be some rather nice looking houses. Right up ahead of us is Main Street, going straight on up the hill, if I can call it a hill. All the roads around here have changed names from the sort of mid-1800s. Used to be Front Street. We used to have a back lane, I think, and then a front street. This road here used to be Red Row, but it's all been levelled now. There used to be a lot of houses down here of a certain age, including a fish and chip shop. Another lost street is where this cream building over on the right is. That used to be Victoria Street. It's just not even a street anymore. You used to have Dax Butcher's shop down here if you were of a certain age. Can't tell you which one was Dax Butcher's shop, but it's probably gone. Victoria Street as was. Great fun with a 1920s map last night, which was marked with a post office up here, trying to work out which of these buildings was that post office, and I decided it was that one over there with the cladding and the two white doors next to us, just behind that black car. I think that was the post office. I think it was the second post office in the village. We'll see the first one later on, but I believe those two buildings there were the post office, or one of them, or two of them. If I've got a photo, I'll put it up. That house there used to be a shop. Reams and Son on the right hand side with the flat window. And that was a rather grand 1912 built infant school, which is now a des res. You can live in it. It must be one hell of a house to live in. But yeah, we'll talk about schools a bit more in a mo. And that was the infant school built in 1912 on what used to be a farmyard. Very nice. And classic school building. I'm going to take a left turn here down Field Terrace. Just have a short wander. Sally Army HQ. And that's been there, I think, since 1911. Doesn't look that old. But it is. The only other building of interest surviving down here is the one to the left of this car up ahead, which used to be the bakery. I think built in 1897. No idea how long it went on for. I read some of the villagers used to come up on a Sunday with their roasted whatever, their roast joints, and if the ovens were still on, he'd let them use the ovens to cook their Sunday roast, or at least their joint. It's a lovely sort of row of terrace houses down here, which reminds me of sort of Farcet's own version of Coronation Street. A lot of character. And that was the bakery. You can see the ghost doorway on the corner there was presumably the door into the bakery. And I guess all the work was done in the building behind it. Right, coming down to the rather complicated school quarter. The old school, built 1912. I think it closed in the early 70s to move to the current school. It's across the other side of the village, which you won't be seeing. Right, we're just wandering back down Middle Street now, as it's called. This used to be known as Chapel Street, which intrigued me because I thought there was no chapel down here. But I think I found one. White House coming up, centre picture. In the 1880s was converted from a house to a chapel. It didn't last long as a chapel, became a day school about 1910ish, and then it was sold back and became a house again. So it's not exactly a chapel, as it were. It doesn't look like a chapel. You know, most Wesleyan chapels look the same, this doesn't, but it was a chapel for a period of time. It's why it's called Chapel Street, I guess. I might have got it totally wrong. Maybe they demolished the chapel, but I'm sure that's it because it matches up with an old map. So I'm going to stick with that unless you know different. I'm just going to go back on schools now because the infant school we saw is just on our left at the top of this road. But the building we're walking towards now used to be the headmaster's house of the very first school here in Farcet, which dates back to the 1670s. And it was a tiny school. Because it was a very small village then. It was a tiny school, and it soon got outgrown. The actual the school building was in the back garden of the headmaster's house, which I suspect was bigger than the actual school was. But once it outgrew itself, they built a school next to it on the right, which is now a bungalow. You can just see it sneaking into shot. That used to be where the next school was, and I think that was 1840s. And that was a mixed school, but eventually that got too big, so that got split. The juniors stayed here, and in 1912, with the juniors staying in place, and it's completely gone now, there's nothing to see, with the juniors staying in place right here. The infants crossed the road into the much grander infant school. And as I say, I think they all sort of closed and came together when the early 1970s school on the other side of the village opened, which is still open today. The building over the road there behind that blue car, it looks like it was a Chinese. I don't think it is anymore. That was the village's first post office. It's called Jubilee House, and it has a date stamp of 1897. And it was the post office to the early 1900s, and it moved down the hill to that stone-clad building we saw on the way up, which I think was the post office. So this one moved to that one, but this was the first post office. any of you know Alwalton village and Alwalton post office, you'll know if you walk down the hill from Alwalton post office, there's a rather fantastic gateway and doorway about 2 houses down from the post office with a I think it's about 1674, something like that, stamp on it, and it looks really old and not in keeping with the rest of the village. Well, it came from Farcet, and it came from the Farcet Manor House as was, and the Manor House was about, well, it's down Churchill Close, and I say it's down there, it's long since gone, but it would have been somewhere over there on the left, around about that house or behind it. And that doorway and gateway, when it was demolished, was moved and resited in Alwalton village. 1673. The Manor House was demolished, I think it's 1966. That's when it would have moved to Alwalton. Worth seeing if you haven't seen it. It's a fantastic gateway and very authentic, just not of Alwalton. Coming up to Manor Close, named after the old manor farm that used to sit there, one of a number of farms in the village. Across the way there, that lovely old building, mid-1600s house and shop. I think the shop was on the left. I think that bit was the shop. Now, the garden of that shop was to its left, and they sold it. They sold the plot of land to build a rather wonderful building. If I remember right, it used to be the paper shop, Farcet Paper Shop, 1891 to 2008. They sold the garden for £80, or the land, to build this magnificent, what was a Wesleyan chapel. 1908. Closed in 1970, or 1970s. I can't be too sure when in the 70s, but yeah, it existed as the main Wesleyan chapel in the village from 1908 onwards. It's now the village hall, as you can see. It's a magnificent building. I mean, these Wesleyan chapels always are, but this one is amongst the best I've ever seen. Really, really nice. So even though it may not look it, was a drapery and grocery shop run by Betty Jinks in the 1920s, and she used to operate the shop from her front room, which is presumably the one on the right there. So a nice little local tradesperson in the 1920s. History object coming up in the grass to the left of the giveaway sign is a stone. It's marked on old 1900s maps as stone, which led me to think, what on earth is it? It was put there by London Brick in about 1910, which I presume means they found it in one of their brickyards. It's made out of Barnack stone, they know that. And all I can say is I can guess that it's the base of an old cross, but what it's doing in the brickyards, I don't know. The Farcet stone. St Mary's Church. Let's go and have a look. I'm not sure quite what this means, but the church, according to the notes I've got, is run by its own members, and the grounds are maintained by Huntingdonshire District Council because it's a closed churchyard. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I know what all that means. That's the tower, believed to date back to about 1180. I've seen this before, I've done a wedding here before and had to sneak around the back here to look at the tower because these windows, I mean the one at the top's got an element of Norman architecture about it, which could be simply because it is late Norman. And those two windows in the middle, likewise. So it could possibly be, I mean it was believed there was a church here before, but it wouldn't have been a Norman church, it probably would have just been a wooden church. So I think it's just a sort of transitional period, 1180, when the Norman architecture was there, but the next sort of style of architecture was coming in, so it's a bit all over the place really. Even this one over here looks a bit of a more recent window, or pair of windows set inside what could easily pass as a more Norman style of arch, although it's probably not. But again, yeah, there's hints of Norman in this church, probably because it just hadn't phased out yet. There's a collapsed chest tomb. In fact, the design looks identical to the one behind, just in pieces, or in kit form. A nice project for somebody to put that back together. Probably late 1700s, the same as the one behind. I recall it saying that apart from the tower, the only other really old part, as in 1200s or late 1100s, was inset into the doorway or the porch, as it were, which I assume means it's that arch in front of us that was moved at some point to form part of this doorway. So I assume that arch at the front here, if it doesn't go back to 1180, it probably goes back to soon after then. No danger of getting in this one. It does say on the internet that it is closed. Here lieth the body of Dorothea Wright, who died August the 4th, 1674. She did good by healing. Good heavens. What is that about? Certainly got herself a prominent position. The other listed tombstone dates to 1874 and is inscribed to Anne Jennings. Not sure I can read that. Right, heading down Broadway now towards Yaxley. We won't be going to Yaxley. There's a few things to look at down here, or a couple of things. It's gone nice and quiet for once. Just popping up here really to visit the cemetery. Not because I'm morbid, but because there's an old mortuary chapel here that dates back to about, I think, 1901. And there's also a war memorial from just after the Great War. So I'd like to see those. Let's try and find those. That's the mortuary chapel coming up ahead. As I say, built in 1901. Easier to view from the other side. Guess where those bricks came from. Probably just across the road. big place. Larger than I thought it would be. There you go, Mortuary Chapel. Very nice. Looks like the War Memorial up ahead. At a guess. Yep, it is. As I say, I think it dates to 1920. I mean, they all did. All the Great War memorials were set up shortly after the Great War had concluded, so it's primarily a Great War memorial, but I'm sure there'll be a Second World War stone. And there it is. Brave men, much respect. And these will be the, looks like there's 3 Commonwealth graves. Private Rowlett, Private Reams, and let's walk past this. Private Parkinson. Respect to all 3 of them and to all of the names on here. Brave people. Oh, just grabbing a quick breather. I said earlier we'd mention George Alcock. George was actually born in Fletton. I think he went to Orchard Street School, and I think he went to the grammar school briefly in Fletton as well. So I'm assuming he was born there. He was certainly born in Peterborough, and given where he went to school, I'm going to say he was born in Fletton. But when he came back from college, he was let's say an amateur astronomer. But he rapidly went on from being an amateur astronomer to being one of great repute, not just nationally, but globally as well. He discovered his own comet. In fact, he discovered quite a few astral beings, if you like. Beings being the wrong word. Planets, you know what I mean. Planets, stars and whatever. And very well respected indeed. And he got an MBE for services to astronomy. And for most of his life, I think from 1955 onwards, he lived just down the road from this cemetery. We'll just be popping past and pointing at it as we go. If you're old enough like me to remember The Sky at Night with Patrick Moore, he actually recorded one of his episodes in the living room of George, just down the road from here. So Farcet appeared on Sky at Night, as it were. I was hoping to find an old copy of the programme, but I couldn't. What I did find is a very brief summary of George, probably a lot better than what I've just tried to do. So I'm going to let that run now and let you have a quick look at it. It's only short, so bear with it. There you go. George Alcock. He died in 2000, and I believe he was buried, and certainly has a memorial at Peterborough Cathedral. So if you're wandering around Peterborough Cathedral, you might see something relating to George Alcock. I think he's got some sort of centre of, I don't know what it is, some sort of social centre in Stanground. I can't tell you more about it, but if you're from Stanground, you'll be thinking, well, I know what you mean. There's something with George's name on, so he's very, very proudly thought of in this part of the world, sort of Stanground, Yaxley, Farcet, but he did live in Farcet for most of his life, for the last sort of 40 years of his life. So I'm going to wander off now from the cemetery, but I will point at the Alcock abode as it was as we go past. Just before I leave, I'll grab a shot of this one and look the people up. This design of stone crops up in several places in this churchyard. I love this sort of big surname across the bottom. I don't know what it reminds me of, ice hockey, and the name's on the back of the shirt. It's Boone. No disrespect intended, but whoever was making these, he did pretty well out of this churchyard, because as I say, they crop up quite a few times. In loving memory of Annie, the beloved wife of Isaac Boone, who died 1902, aged 55. Also of Isaac Boone, died in 1911 in his 68th year. And of Ernest David, their son, who died in 1910, aged the tragically young age of 19 years. I'll find something out about them. I'll put them on the bottom of the screen as usual. Coming back down Broadway, and this was the Alcock abode on the right here, called Antares. This is where George and his wife lived from 1955 to his death in 2000. May he rest in peace. Antares, I had to look it up, means well, it refers to a supergiant red star, and that's not my description, that's an astronomical term, which is referred to as a supergiant red star, Antares. Some of these houses look quite old, but none of them are listed. There's definitely some date in some of them, probably late 1890s villas. There's one particularly nice one, if I recall, a bit further along. Right, I think it's just behind this tree. Sort of an immaculately looked after house, but it's got some date on it. 1888 it says at the top. Very nice. I think I read somewhere these were London brick houses, so presumably owned by the company for certain of its workforce. I could be totally wrong, but I'm sure I read reference to them being on Broadway, more or less opposite the church. They do all look identical, so I suspect they were workers' cottages or houses from London brick. Someone's clad theirs just to be different, why not? Can't have a church without a vicarage, and Farcet's got two. A current one, which last time I saw it was empty, and the old original one, and they're just coming up on the right. That one there is quite a new build, 1987, and it is marked as the vicarage, and I'm pretty sure it is empty. Which I guess is something to do with the fact that the church is sort of owned by its members now. The new build there was actually built in rather extensive gardens belonging to the old vicarage, which is next door to the left. I have to excuse the noise, we are on Peterborough Road. This is why I didn't want to be on it earlier on. But anyway, stop moaning. That's the old vicarage, built 1850, closed 1986 as a vicarage when it moved next door. Very nice. To the left of it is a distinctly obvious granary building, and I have no idea what it is today. It still looks like a granary building for one of the nearby farms. It used to be used by the Brownies at one point, and I read somewhere that the Brownies used it, but apart from that I can't tell you anything apart from it's an old granary building. Looking on the wall on the right hand side, it looks like there was an older building underneath the brick layer up top. Those houses drifting down the road down on the corner, they were post Second World War sort of temporary accommodation while they built, thank you, while they built something more substantial, and they're still here and they're still looking good and they're still being lived in, but they were meant to be just post Second World War temporary accommodation. I think they look quite smart actually. We've got another pub coming up here, only you're not going to see anything. It was the Black Horse pub, closed in 1985, and it didn't hang around because in 1986 it was levelled completely, to the point of trying to work out where it was is not easy. But from old photographs, which I'm sure I'll share with you in a mo, the pub was to the left of this building, Cleveland House, which was standing at the time of the pub. So I think the pub was just slightly back from the road, where those two cottages, sorry, two bungalows are. So those two bungalows on the side of the pub, the Black Horse. The road opposite Gazeley Gardens was on the site of Gazeley Hall, built around about the early 1800s, closed I think 1963, and where all these houses are used to be extensive wooded gardens. The hall was quite some way back from this road, and had a tough life in the early 1900s or early mid 1900s. It got struck by lightning not once but twice, and the second time caused a fire. Ended up being derelict. Kids used to play in it until they found out there was a ghost there, the Gazeley ghost, and shortly after that, I think it was in 1965, it was demolished, and this estate, if I can call it that, was built in its place. I do have an old scratchy photograph somewhere I'll put up, not much to see, but yeah, Gazeley Hall. Put up a nice aerial photograph here of what was Story's Garage, which existed from 1920 right through to 1970s. So it was here for a long while, and very well known in these parts, and it still survives today, albeit it's not Story's Garage anymore, it's Farcet Hand Car Wash. Although it's a car wash and not a garage, it's still distinctly recognisable with many of the old buildings. Still standing, it's still recognisable, as I say. This is a busy road. Now I need to find 113, because that used to be Betty's Stores. And if you're of a certain age and you lived in these parts, you'll know Betty's Stores, run by Betty Dolby. It was a kind of one of those shops every village should have. Sold a little bit of everything, but the kids will remember it sold sweets. And I just want to find it. It's that one over there with a sort of pink wash on the walls, if that's pink. Let's see if I can dive over in a second. Yeah. That's it, 113. Betty's Stores. Good old Betty's Stores. Right. Nearly walking past that, and I don't want to do that. It used to be Carter's Butchers, built by Alfred Carter and his wife in 1933, which is the year they got married. Closed in 1962 when Alfred died, and it was a big butcher's business. It wasn't just a shop. He had all the supporting buildings around the back. Big place. I think it became a hair salon after that, and then it became a printer's. I think it's still a printer's today, not the same printers. But it's obviously got facilities that lend themselves to printers because it's gone from one printer to another. But it used to be Carter's Butchers. Just get the sneaky look at Farcet Windmill there. I hope to get closer in a minute. Built in the mid 1800s, had a really bad year in 1899 when strong winds blew the sails off. And later in the same year blew the top off as well in a separate storm, and it didn't last after that. I mean, not many windmills did last beyond the end of the 1800s, but this one certainly didn't. And it's now a nice des res. It's got a nice house wrapped around it, as you'll see hopefully. I think that was all done in the very early 2000s, but finished as a windmill in 1899. Let's go and see if we can get a bit closer. Right, let's have a look. Beware of the dog, eh? Let's go and give it a try. It's actually now an Airbnb. You can book and stop here if it's free. And as you'll see, it's very nice. Hope there's nobody at home. There you go. Wonderful, really is. Farcet Mill, built around about the 1850s. And absolutely wrecked by strong winds in 1899, and it's survived. I think it's grade 2 listed, so you're going to have to do something with it. You ain't knocking it down. But they've done a fantastic job. I'm going to put up some pictures in a second from the, I think it was a sales brochure. It could actually be from the Airbnb site, just to show you how fantastic it is inside. As you can see, it's very, very nicely turned out, both outside and inside, in fairness. Of course, you can't have a mill without a mill house where the miller would have lived, and there it is. So that'll date back to 1850, the mill house. Classic mill house. Right, that's it, gone full circle now. I'll keep it short and sweet, it's a bit noisy, but that's Farcet for you. Whistle stop tour. I hope you found something of interest as normal, and thank you very much as usual for joining me and keeping me company. Any comments, as ever, add them on Peterborough Images or YouTube under the video. Always helps me to make sense of what I couldn't make sense of, and I will be out again. I don't know this time, I haven't got a clue where I'm going next time. I'm going to have to look something up. If you've got any ideas about where to visit, give me a shout. You never know, I might come out your way. Otherwise, as I say, thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you hopefully next time.